Hi, AJ Hartley here, novelist, Shakespeare professor, fan of various elements of Japanese art and culture. And I want to talk today about a TV show called AGGRETSUKO.
財布持った、定期持った、携帯持った。25歳独身、サソリ座の A 型。
おっとんどお湯だね。レツコ君入れ直して。
多分どこにでもいるありふれた普通の OL。
疲れてる暇なんてないわよ。この時期は人手が足りないの。
おい腰掛け。じゃあ
だけど私には人に言えない秘密の趣味がある。
Some of you, I'm sure, already know this. It's been on Netflix for a while. The fifth and final season aired earlier this year, and I thought I would finally get round to talking about it. Before I do that, if you haven't already done so, please consider picking up my new novel, Hideki Smith, Demon Queller, which is about a mixed-race family like mine battling Japanese monsters in the mountains of North Carolina. So, AGGRETSUKO. So the show is based on a manga series, which I'm not familiar with. I'm only familiar with the Netflix version of the show. Each episode, except for the very final one of the fifth season, I think, is about 15 minutes long. The animation style is very sort of bold, broad, digital. The background mats are often actually quite complex and fairly realist looking, but the characters are done as anthropomorphized animal figures. The main character, Retsuko, is a red panda.
レツコ、まさかあの仕事全部終わらせたのか？
根性で終わらせた。
おお、真面目。
それ友達にも言われた。私ってそんな真面目？
え？まあ。
真面目で堅実だよね。携帯アプリの利用規約を端から端まで読み尽くすまで同意ボタンを押さないタイプ。
それ友達にも言われた。
この年で老後のために貯金してるタイプ。
それも言われた。
服屋で何も買わずに帰るのは悪いような気がして、とりあえず3足1000円の靴下買っちゃうタイプ。
だからなんでわかるの
The other animal figures within the show have elements of the animal in their character, right? But not in a way which reduces them. So some of the time it doesn't seem to matter very much what animal they actually are. And they live in a version of metropolitan Tokyo near Saitama. The show centers on the office where Retsuko works. She's middle rank office worker in an accountancy department. And the show hinges on her as a kind of mild-mannered, commonsensical, hard-working, understated presence.
だって相手に何か期待されると身を削ってクソ真面目に答えちゃうタイプじゃん。
ああ、なるほど。そうかも。
会社ではその性格が災いして上司に仕事をしつけられて自滅するタイプ。小心者であるがゆえに企業の思惑に絡め取られたロボット。過労死を待つ列に自分から並ぶ従順な社畜。ブラック企業を超え太らせるための餌。
おいベネコ、その辺にしとけよ。
あ、ごめん、言い過ぎた。
Who gets rid of her various frustrations by singing death metal in her sort of growly metal voice in a karaoke booth by herself, initially by herself. So she's very understated, very quiet, polite, even when she's having to put up with a lot of crap. But then she goes and lets it all out through her death metal. So obviously you see the appeal to somebody like me because of the kind of things that I'm interested in, the music that I listen to. And this seemed like a perfect, fun show that uses the music to channel all her frustrations and rage. I will say that initially I went into the show thinking pretty much that. And after the first few episodes, I thought, yeah, this is fun. This is cool. I mean, it's actually genuinely funny. And occasionally sort of a little touching, a little thought-provoking. But I thought kind of it's going to be sort of a one-joke show. And initially I thought, yeah, a season maybe. And then it will be done, or I will be done with it. Boy, was I wrong. What I love about this show is that in the ensuing seasons, we start to move outside her office more and more, while simultaneously recognizing just how important the office is for shaping so much of what is wrong with her life. And I think that I've seen, a bit of fan commentary. I'm not part of the fan community of AGGRETSUKO, so I don't claim to be an expert on that at all. But I've seen some conversations back and forth about the strengths and weaknesses of the show, and some people just don't really seem to understand what it is that they're watching, and they critique it for the wrong reasons. I think that it's a very Japanese show, and by that I mean that much of what it's talking about, even though I think a Western audience can appreciate it, can connect with it, can relate to it, has a very Japanese topicality. Now, let me say right at the outset, and I don't think I should have to say this. At this point, if you've seen me on this channel before, you know that there's a ton about Japan that I love, that I respect, and that I miss, and keeps taking me back, and obviously my extended family are Japanese. But there are other things about Japan which are maddening and powerfully frustrating. And watching AGGRETSUKO reminded me of some of those things. When I lived in Japan in the late 80s, and this will be relevant, I think, to what I have to say about the show, I had a blast. I had a wonderful time. I was there for 2 years. But at the end of the 2 years, the frustrations were getting the better of me, the things that were getting me down, and I needed to leave. I had to go. And it took me a while to go back. I've been back many times since, and I've reconnected with the culture. But the show, AGGRETSUKO, reminded me of some of those frustrations, and they have been exacerbated, I think, by the combination of changes and lack of change within Japanese society. All of that is to say that some of what comes up in the show, and which I'll be talking about, is quite critical of Japanese society and culture. But that doesn't take away from my love of many things Japanese, obviously, including Japanese people, of course. So Retsuko is in this incredibly frustrating job where she is frequently bullied by her old school boss, Ton, the director, who pushes her around and minimizes her contribution and makes fun of her, punishes her, and never rewards her for anything good that she does. And this is a source of her frustration. But in the course of the subsequent seasons, we start to see this as a kind of endemic problem throughout the workplace culture in contemporary Japan. And a lot of this hinges on a couple of key elements about Japanese society, which are paradoxically things that as foreigners we love, but which are sometimes very problematic. And I'm saying two things. There are more things, but I'm reducing them to two, and those two are related as well. One of them is the valuing of tradition, One of the things that we love about Japan is its sense of its own history, its sense of keeping the past alive, not just in its buildings, but in its art forms and in the way that it values not just the past, but old people, the way that it celebrates a sense of rootedness, that it's not constantly evolving and changing so that it loses touch with its own origins. Foreigners love this. It's part of what we love to see when we go to Japan. A related thing, I think, is the politeness of Japan. Now, that's a positive way of putting it, and I mean that positively. Another way of putting it is the restrictions placed on personal communication, social constraints that prevent people from articulating themselves freely and openly without fear of consequence. And these two things come together particularly in the Japanese office, in the workplace, where a combination of these impulses, the inability to have a free exchange of ideas without fear of upsetting one's social superior particularly, and being seen as not playing along, coupled with this traditional idea of this is how we do stuff because this is how we have always done it, becomes a kind of catch-22, a box which people are incapable of escaping. And there's a sense in which this has always been true. It was certainly true in the 80s when I was living there, and it's part of my own frustrations. Having to go into the office on a Saturday when I didn't have anything to do, but this is what we do, so we have to do it. And I'm sitting there doing nothing. Maddening. But also, I think this has been exacerbated since the 80s, specifically since the 90s, and since the economic collapse of that bubble economy, which has left people continuing to work in the same ways as they always did, only for less, getting less out of it, spending more and more time in it, investing your entire sense of self in the workplace, and having no emotional energy and no money for anything else. This becomes a concern throughout the show in the subsequent seasons as Retsuko's life continues. Stylistically, I've heard people compare the show to things like The Simpsons and South Park. I think that's wrong. Those shows don't have the same sense of character. They're satires in a different sense. And each episode begins almost exclusively as if nothing has happened before it, right? Each episode, you could watch these episodes in a Simpsons season in any order and it wouldn't make any difference. That's not the case with AGGRETSUKO. AGGRETSUKO has storylines, plot lines that go from episode to episode throughout the season, and each season builds on the one before it. So these are, in a sense, real people living out their lives. But the show is also heavily invested in social commentary and critique. So that it's doing both things. And I think where people get it wrong sometimes is that they insist on a binary. Either it's a character show and none of the other stuff matters, or it's a social commentary show and the character stuff doesn't matter. That to me misrecognizes the nature of the narrative. It's clearly both. The way the show functions is that Retsuko is most of the time our point of view character. She's the one who has the most level-headed perspective on the world, and it's her voice that we hear as saying, here's the stuff that I'm dealing with which is crazy or frustrating or demoralizing. And the characters around her are usually a little bit more two-dimensional, and they each represent in different ways either social forces within contemporary Japan or people responding to those forces. Retsuko is frustrated at work. She lets it out through her death metal singing, but she's constantly looking for a way out. Moving to another job is not an option, and this is very much about the nature of the way the Japanese workplace functions. Lateral movement is very difficult. You invest in a company, and that company is supposed to look after you for life, and you gradually attain seniority within the company, right? But if you've seen any videos made by Japanese people in the last few years, you'll see how much frustration there is with that mentality within Japanese businesses, particularly the way that younger people are left doing the grunt work for which they get no credit. Because that, again, this is the way we have always done things, and you will get your benefits when you're 55 and above. Except, of course, that the company's tanking, the economy is tanking, and nobody's getting paid anything. And the young people are frequently frustrated by that sense of powerlessness, and they don't know how to get out of it. If you were to move into another company, then you start at the bottom of the ladder in that company. So it's hard for somebody who's been in a job for a number of years to move into a different position at a different company at roughly the same level. It doesn't work that way. And again, Japanese people, please feel free to correct me if you think I'm misrepresenting that. And I'm not going to do a sort of season by season close analysis of the show. But what happens is that for Retsuko and for her friends, Haida and Feneko, I love Feneko, and some of the other characters around her, the show becomes about how you try to give meaning to your life when so much of your time and energy is consumed by a job which is, to all intents and purposes, meaningless, and where you get nothing back from it, except another mark on the fact that you have survived another year with that company, right? And that's the investment. So, people are looking for connection with other people. One of the ways out for women particularly is to get married. But how are you supposed to meet somebody and build a relationship when you are permanently exhausted from work, which impedes on your social time in all kinds of problematic ways, the mandatory drinks parties and all this other stuff that stops you from ever being in a situation where you can go out and meet people? And I think this has also been exacerbated by the pandemic, right? So there are various forms of omiai, arranged marriages, and the digital versions of those things, which people start to obsess over. But they all have a kind of hollowness, a sense that what you're trying to build something organic and meaningful, but the methodology is not there, whether it's speed dating or internet dating or whatever it is, or an arranged marriage set up by your over-anxious parents, all of which is about trying to find your place within society and a sense of fulfillment and contentment in your life. If the work isn't giving it to you, but it's supposed to, then one of the ways you find it is through having a respectable marriage and family and so on. But you don't have the time to build that. So then we see in the course of the seasons how Retsuko and her friends go down different, bizarre, unreal alleys in pursuit of meaning. For example, people spending all their time doing online gaming, in which they feel like they're making little achievements and getting minor victories, right? Things that are controllable, things that are manageable, without requiring you to really do anything except play the game. And, of course, pay for the game, and constantly pumping in money to try and upgrade or to buy a new item or things like that. So again, the person is reduced to consumer. Things are being dangled in front of them. Meaning and possibility and contentment being dangled, but it's a bait and switch kind of thing. So you go into these games in pursuit of this stuff, and then you get sort of trapped in them and can't find a way to make meaning doing anything else. In season 3, I think it is, we get to a really kind of extraordinary extended consideration of Japanese idol culture as Retsuko gets involved in the support and ultimately the fronting, the performance with an underground idol group called OTM.
それでは新曲「アグレッシブガール」聴いてください。
again, as a baby metal fan, as a fan of a lot of Japanese music, it's a really unflinching study of both the aspirations and the hopes and the positivity associated with those performers, and the logic of the people who are fans of them, and the obsessive fans and the scary fans, right? Man, if you haven't seen this show, you really got to watch this. If you struggle with it, you at least have to get through season 3 if you're a fan of Japanese music, because it's bleak. It's actually quite bleak. I was surprised at how dark it got. But again, it's about both the performers and the audience trying to put something of meaning into their lives when their working world and their disconnection from family and things makes it almost impossible for them to find anything else. So they channel their energies into these unreal fantasy things, whether that's idolizing a particular pop group or playing an online video game, right? Or pursuing real or virtual boyfriends, girlfriends, right? These sort of apps that set up these sort of ridiculous partners who are not real, and you spend money on having a relationship with this character. It's fascinating and really, really interesting. But it all comes down to this very troubling sense that everybody is adrift and trapped. That they can't express themselves, and they can't escape from a work culture which doesn't allow them the space to find any kind of fulfillment. And one of the things that we see is characters who completely check out, either in the case of one of Retsuko's boyfriends, by becoming a sort of worker drone who has no personality and no interests, because he has basically abandoned the idea of any of those things really meaning anything, you know? So he's this sort of blank space, this sort of herbivore kind of mentality. And then later on, Haida, who becomes homeless, effectively, and is living in an internet cafe, which apparently is not uncommon. And he meets a woman there who has also just given up. And she spends all her days playing these video games and things, and has no aspirations and no goals and no desires, and exists in this strange liminal space where she's not actually engaged in anything at all, and can't muster the enthusiasm or the passion to get interested in anything, because none of it pans out. So she's given up. And this is what is going on all around her. And this is what Retsuko's contribution is, because what she offers to these various people, and to the viewer, I would say, is a mouthpiece for rage, for her frustrations and her anxieties and her sense of the meaninglessness of everything. And it comes out in her singing. And in the final season, I don't want to give too much away. All of this gets very political as she becomes basically a candidate for a party that wants to use her rage as a way of galvanizing voters who are sick to the back teeth with this business as usual attitude in business and in government, where everybody's basically doing the same things they have always done and saying the same things they have always done, while an entire 2/3 of the population, the younger population, has been utterly disenfranchised and cut out of the benefits of an economic system which doesn't really exist anymore, right? Which was there in the post-war bubble economy, but which just isn't there now. And all these people are trying to figure out how to change their own culture.
皆さんはじめまして。アグレッシブレツコです。 あと OL やってるとムカつくことほんと多いです。例えば仕事中むやみやたらうるさいやつ、甘い声でくねくねこびてるやつ、人のインスタ漁るだけが生きがいのやつ、原理意識の塊なんかやばいやつ、基本ビビリで気持ちさい割に鼻かむ音は無駄にでかい、時代錯誤的なボスはありがとうも言わずに部下におっちゃい入れさすかっさばるビータル、過去の栄光にしがみつく元政治家、その不敬にひざまずく次男、目は笑ってないな、目は笑ってないな、人気取りの作り笑顔、目は笑ってないな。
This is why I was saying at the beginning that it hinges on questions of communication and on tradition, which are good things, right? Politeness and respect for the past, these are good things. But there are also times when you have to smash these things. And this is what the show's about, where if you're going to have any kind of future, things have to change and we have to figure out how to do that. I don't know that the show offers real solutions. It provides a kind of commentary on these issues. And as I say, a commentary grounded in character and the small battles that people face on a daily basis. But I think it floats this general sense of the need for people to take their stand and to speak up and to be prepared to change things in Japan today. As I say, this is, applicable to a lot of cultures. A lot of people will see resonances in their own workplaces and things like that. But I think it's particularly pertinent to Japan. And if you have been listening to bands like Baby Metal or Hanabiye or Atarashi Gaiko for that matter, you feel this energy which is specifically youthful and antagonistic to a lot of the old structures in Japanese culture and society, where part of what the impulse behind some of this stuff is, even though most of it is very positive and very constructive and optimistic, it's still driven by an anger and a frustration and a sense that somehow young people have to be able to define themselves in different ways and break out of a system that isn't working for them. And that's what AGGRETSUKO is about. I'm not sure what else to say. I got to say, I love this show. I wasn't convinced initially. I thought, as I said, it's amusing, entertaining. But with each season, it gets richer and more layered and more complex. And it's still fun. It's still honestly laugh out loud funny. I know that I'm not making it sound funny at all, but it absolutely is. It's genuinely entertaining. And there are moments where I actually got quite sort of choked up. And there are moments when I was laughing. But it leaves you with this sense you need to take a little step back from it. You need to think through some of the stuff that's going on in the episodes and in the season arcs particularly. This is a show that works. There may be individual flashes of moments where people say things that are absolutely on the money in a particular episode. But the general swell of the whole season is where the meat of the thing lies. And you need to sort of step back from it and say, okay, I see where this is going and what it's doing. And for the people who say the show fell apart after the first or second season or something, wrong. You might think that, but you'd be wrong.
ウケるペーネコ先輩
This, where the show finishes up, feels absolutely organically built into where it started. It magnifies, it steps back, and then it comes right back to where it began. Because that's the problem. There's a sense in which you're stuck, you're trapped within a system that doesn't change, and we have to figure out a way to do otherwise. So, if you haven't already seen it, check out AGGRETSUKO. Trust me, you will not be disappointed. That's all I'm going to say. As ever, please like, comment, subscribe. Thank you to my patrons. Check out my Patreon page. Check out my merchandise. Check out my book. Have I said that enough? And I will talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye.